And the and so we're gonna spend a little bit of time on three different chunks: first poetry, then fiction, and finally nonfiction, to think about the ways in which we can kind of create meaning through those respective genres. How much, I mean, have either of you spent much time writing, whether that's for, you know, simply journaling or kind of reflecting in a maybe longer term way, or have you just, you know, ever written poetry or anything like that before?
Well, oh, hi. Hello, Lucia.
Hello.
Good. Well, Lucy and I actually are semi-working on something together. Lucia's my granddaughter, Vanessa's my daughter, and I write a lot, so I'm very interested in all of this. And Lucy, you missed one of the things he said is Joan Didion, a writer, her quote was, "I don't know what I'm thinking until I write it down." And so it's just such a great way to express yourself, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And journaling and thinking, oh, I didn't even know I was feeling that way until I saw it on the page. There's almost like something comes down and speaks through us, you know. It's that for me, the creative thing of writing is really great.
Yeah, absolutely. So what sort of is most of what you write kind of journal or journal adjacent, or is it kind of a much wider range of works forms?
Well, you're writing nonfiction novels, right?
I'm writing, both of my books have been nonfiction, but my background is much wider than that, to include, you know, fiction, scripts, some poetry, and, you know, journalism. So
journalism is important. Yeah. Well, Lucy and I are working on a script.
Okay. And stage, screen,
TV.
Okay.
And we're not sure yet if it's going to be like a limited series or a feature or a TV. You know, we're just playing around with it right now.
Yeah, yeah, that's an exciting place to be.
And then Lou's writing a scary movie right now too by herself.
I'm a big horror fan, so I
great.
like to hear that. So you know, as I mentioned, we're gonna start by looking at poetry. The way that these sections will kind of work are, I have readings from each. I have an exercise for poetry as well as nonfiction. We're gonna skip fiction for the sake of both time, but also because there's a point I want to make about the nonfiction, and, you know, talk about both what we've read and you know, to the degree that you all are comfortable sharing what you work on in these short exercises, would love to chat with you about that. But I wanted to start us with poetry because I feel like poetry is in many ways kind of the most direct or foundational form of writing to consider in terms of language and how language can kind of indirectly create forms of meaning. And what I mean by that is the meaning that is generated from poetry oftentimes is not through information that's conveyed to you, but through the use of language, words, word choice, line breaks, rhyme, rhythm, all of these things that are almost, I feel like their meaning is created through some sort of lizard brain process where we don't even always necessarily know or understand on a definitional level maybe everything that's going on, but rather what I hope that you take away from reading poetry is a comfort with seeing how you feel in the moment reading poetry and being comfortable taking away that meaning from it. I think that a lot of people are shy away from poetry because it feels arcane or complex, and or there is one correct way of reading poetry. And if you haven't experienced that in a classroom setting, there's nothing to be gotten from poetry. And I really want to do away with that idea and really rather have you feel comfortable taking whatever meaning you or reaction you have when reading a poem and finding value in that. You know, there are tools and tricks and other ways of reading poems that one can turn to if one is really interested in kind of a long-term relationship with poetry. But on a simple level, I think that I love poetry because there is this, it is the form of writing where language is well and truly totally able to play and create meaning through language itself in a way that is a little more distant with fiction and nonfiction, where the meaning that we get from reading fiction and nonfiction is by understanding and interpreting the text rather than just experiencing the text. So what I want us to, I'm gonna pull up on the screen as well as send you a link to a poem by Robert Lowell, who is one of the foremost kind of confessional poets of the 20th century. Someone who, rather than playing with narrative or telling a story through verse, really interrogates and uses himself as the poet as the inspiration for his texts. So I'm going to have us start by reading the poem. This is called Skunk Hour. Does anyone care to read? I'm happy to read the poem too, but if anyone is feeling inspired to read, that would also be great.
Should we all share a paragraph maybe?
Sure, we could do that. Who want I could in that case what I might do is have you how many people do we have here? We have 2, 4, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. Well, then I'm going to have us go down the order that I see you on screen. So, Mom, do you want to start?
Sure. Skunk Hour. Nautilus Island's hermit, Eris, still lives through winter in her Spartan cottage. Her sheep still graze at the sea. Her son's bishop, her farmer, is the first selectman of our village. She's in her dotage.
Thirsting for the hierarchic privacy of Queen Victoria's century, she buys up all the eyesores facing her shore and lets them fall. Lucia, you want to go with the third one?
The season's ill, we've lost our summer millionaire who seemed to lead from an LL Bean catalogs. Colleague, right?
His
9-knot yawl was auctioned off to lobstermen. A red fox stain covers Blue Hill.
Great. Ingrid, do you want to go for the next stanza?
Sure, but I'll write. Okay, there's background noise. And now our fairy decorator brightens his shop for fall. His fishnets filled with orange cork, orange. His cobbler's bench and all. There is no money in his work. He'd rather marry.
Awesome. Sandra, do you want to do the next one?
One dark night, my Tudor Ford climbed the hill's skull. I watched for love cars, lights turned down. They lay together hull to hull. Where the graveyard shelves on the town, my mind's not right.
Jeff.
A car radio bleats, love, oh careless love. I hear my ill spirit sob in each blood cell, as if my hand were at its throat. I myself am hell, nobody's here.
Victoria, do you want to do the next one?
Only skunks that search in the moonlight for a bite to eat. They march on their soles up Main Street, white stripes, moonstruck eyes, a red fire under the chalk dry and sparse spire of the Trinitarian Church.
I stand on top of our back steps and breathe in the rich air. A mother skunk with her column of kittens swills the garbage pail. She jabs her wedge head in a cup of sour cream, drops her ostrich tail, and will not scare. So who wants to give their first impressions? I realize a loaded question, but
that probably 2 times or 3 to really get to the depths of what it really means. But I mean, I've read poetry for many years. It's an interesting one, but I always think that, at least as a filmmaker, I feel like one of my first films was of a poem, and it's always beautiful to visualize. So what I liked about that poem is I was starting to visualize all of what was said in my own way. So I'm sure we all visualized it in a different way.
Yeah,
each of us.
Yeah. I was visualizing something about love and like grief and like being in a tower or something. I don't know, maybe because my princess like fantasies about stories.
Yeah, in the beginning it kind of does have that like someone looking over either a town or like an ocean or something from a high kind of cliff or something like that. And I mean, you know, again, what I think the value is for poetry among writers and just as another art form to interact with is that there is this kind of the most visceral relationship between the words that we choose and the sensation, you know, more than trying to create some sort of universally correct definition of what a poem is or is about. We can instead, you know, poetry does allow us to experience the written word on this kind of immediate level. You know, for reference, you know, as I mentioned, Robert Lowell was one of the progenitors of confessional poetry in the 20th century. Had a very fraught relationship to his mother, which is, you know, one of the interpretations of kind of this these first few stanzas, and this turn to the self, this kind of voyeuristic sense of creating stories or poetry from other people's lives, like a skunk, which, you know, that image and connection alone creates a certain idea of who the poet is if he sees himself as a skunk. So I think confessional poets are a nice jumping off point into some of the other forms that we'll be looking at if you kind of believe that every story is at least partially about the writer. I want us to do a quick exercise here that I'm hoping is going to work out on a technical level, but let me know if we encounter any problems. So what I'm going to have us make are erasure poems. And an erasure poem is a poem that uses a text and deletes sections of the text in order to kind of create new meaning from it. So what I have for us are first, an example of an erasure poem, which you will only see kind of the final product of, as well as a few example, or rather source texts that you can choose one of in order to create your erasure poem. Traditionally, what you do with an erasure poem is start by printing something out and kind of using a Sharpie to cross out sections. Since we're digital, we don't have that opportunity. But what I'm going to say is you all should have your notebooks with you. And what I'd like you to do is take a section of the text. It can be as short or as long as you'd like. We'll give you 10 minutes to kind of work on this. And either kind of take a section of the text and kind of write down those words that most kind of that help bring about a different image than the one that's relayed to you in the source text. Or if you do have a PDF reader and you'd like to instead kind of highlight sections of words, that could work as well. But you know, if it's easier to use your notebook, kind of just take a paragraph section or a couple paragraph sections and kind of just start refining that into the image that you're hoping to create. So the first thing that I'm going to send in our chat is a poem by Tracy K. Smith, the former poet laureate, called Watershed. This is a poem that was created by Tracy drawing from a New York Times Magazine article, as well as an archival interview collection. But I'm just sending this along to you as kind of a form of inspiration if you need it. And then what I'm going to do is I have 3 options for source text to use. One is a story that came out today in the New York Times about aspirin. I have a Wikipedia article on cirrus clouds. And then as your third option, it's just kind of like a wild card. If neither of those appeal to you, I'm going to send you the main page for Wikipedia, where on the left, there is an opportunity to click random article. And that will allow you to cycle through random Wikipedia articles to use as the source text for this found poem. Do you have any questions on like how, sorry, I'm going to send that again because it kind of messed up, on how to kind of create this? It really is open. I want you to feel flexible and open to creating from it what you will. But let me know if you feel totally lost.
Yeah, Aiden, the New York Times article, you have to have a subscription to, so that doesn't allow for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me pull up a different one then.
And I can screen share the poem if anybody's having difficulty opening or just clicking on what's in the chat, because that should open it up.
If needed, yeah. I mean, I think the poem is just there for inspiration if needed, so it's not going to be the source text.
Okay.
Let me quickly pull up. Well, let's just skip the New York Times piece and either do the random Wikipedia article or the cirrus cloud one, just for the ease. Does anyone have any other questions on how to kind of do it?
Yes,
Yeah.
Julie, could you actually put it up on chat for us, the poem?
I will pull that up now.
And then Aiden, with the cirrus cloud and the Wikipedia stuff, we're supposed to extract words from there to build a poem out of. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And so what I'll say is, feel free to DM me in Zoom, or I prefer to, not interrupt people's creation process. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I would say we could have until like 1:40, and then come back here and kind of talk and share those quickly.
And that's 11:40 our time, guys.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Or 10:40, I'm sorry.
Quick, so you want us to use the poem to make our own poem, or you
No,
want
the
us to
poem
use
is
our own
just there
poem?
for inspiration. I think the full complete source text from Wikipedia are going to be the more valuable ones to kind of create new poems from. Just another minute or so. If everyone wants to finish up the line or thought you're working on, then we can. Does anyone feel like sharing their found poem, the race poem?
I have one.
Yeah.
I just took words from the first part. I didn't, which is kind of fun. DuPont waste, it's Washington. Factory, poor health, money mysteries. It accelerates a horror movie. Dead, dead, dead. 200 cows on a slimy 600 acre. Suffering, mother suffering everywhere. It don't look good.
Nice.
Great.
I like that.
Yeah.
Sorry, what?
No, I said it. I love that.
Yeah, I like what you did with rhythm too, kind of emphasizing some of the repetition that existed in the first one, but didn't have the same kind of back-to-back quality. When you were selecting words, Sandra, how did you choose? Was there a rhyme or reason to it, or did you kind of whatever was inspiring you?
Well, I read over the poem and it was pretty clear to me, she's talking about the hideous pollution and what it's doing, even as far out to our food and, all of it. And so I just tried to condense that with what I wrote.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to share theirs?
I can share one. It's totally different. And I based it on the Wikipedia of the cirrus clouds. My mind diverges between sheets of clouds, at times wispy or feathery, elevated, followed by contrails of vapor trails taking me lower to earth, repeating in self-reinforcing loops or remaining in a time lapse of obscurity, hidden and buried in the halos of existence.
I like that. That was just from the Wikipedia article?
Yeah, that's from the Cirrus Clouds Wikipedia
Okay.
article, and I just extracted words.
I like that.
I'll go next because I did the same thing. Ours is very different.
Yeah.
Freezing patterns of thunderstorms, ice crystals, dry air, a self-reinforcing loop, cirrus clouds, thousands of larger moons and droplets of waters reaching the freezing point. Extra, I don't know how to say that word, to the thousands of millimeter series. Help with related changes and the permanent link, as though the earth is just dust in the universe. That's what I got from that article.
Were you trying to create, I feel like that poem has like a lot of very distinct images to it. Was that kind of the level that you were working on, or was that just a happy coincidence?
Well, I feel like I moved some words around after I wrote some of them down, and I just felt like you were saying, to delete certain things that you would think, but it was just fun to play with the words, basically. So that was the fun part about it, but just to visualize something small and big at the same time and add some words in there that made sense to go in there, because I wasn't just using whatever was in the what was written, but some of the stuff that was on the side, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, this seems good.
Yeah, I like that.
So that was fun to do.
Yeah, it is. I don't, regularly write erasure poems, but Wikipedia is such a lovely source to get hyper specific vocabularies and just like interesting words that you would never encounter that have a very particular meaning and maybe aren't always practical to use in a lot of settings, but are nonetheless fun to encounter if you are a word person like I am.
Well, I forget words like crazy. So, I mean, yes, I don't know if I use some of these words that much. So I was, like you said, as far as finding words that you don't normally use, that was the fun part.
Yeah. Unless anyone else wants to share, I do want us to move on to fiction for the sake of time. Does anyone really want to share either how they encountered this exercise or their poem? Cool. Then what I'm going to have us do is move on to fiction and specifically for the sake of this class, flash fiction. Flash fiction is kind of an arbitrary distinction that refers to a story below a certain number of words. Traditionally, you would kind of write a flash fiction story in a single setting, or at least drafted in a single setting, hence the flash. That's not necessarily, I think none of these are hard and fast rules by any means, but generally refers to stories, 750 words or lower. And what I love about flash fiction is due to that kind of one sit down kind of creation, as well as the brevity of the story itself, it really forces a writer and allows a writer in many ways to think about a very particular hyper-specific lens through which one can view a life or a scene in a very detailed way. So what I'm going to have us do for the sake of time is look at one piece by George Saunders. However, I'm also going to attach a PDF in the chat from a Jamaica Kincaid flash fiction piece that I think is just a really good one. But I like this George Saunders piece because I think it kind of well reflects what I was just talking about in terms of having a very specific kind of lens through which to view a story. And I'm just gonna read it to you all for this, and then we can kind of discuss a little bit about it. So Sticks by George Saunders. Every year, Thanksgiving night, we flocked out behind Dad as he dragged the Santa suit to the road and draped it over a kind of crucifix he built out of a metal pole in the yard. Super Bowl week, the pole was dressed in a jersey and Rod's helmet, and Rod had to clear it with Dad if he wanted to take the helmet off. On the 4th of July, the pole was Uncle Sam. On Veterans Day, a soldier. On Halloween, a ghost. The pole was Dad's only concession to glee. We were allowed a single Crayola from the box at a time. One Christmas Eve, he shrieked at Kimmy for wasting an apple slice. He hovered over us as we poured ketchup, saying, "Good enough, good enough, good enough." Birthday parties consisted of cupcakes, no ice cream. The first time I brought a date over, she said, "What's with your dad and that pole?" And I sat there blinking. We left home, married, had children of our own, found the seeds of meanness blooming also within us. Dad began dressing the pole with more complexity and less discernible logic. He draped some kind of fur over it on Groundhog Day and lugged out a floodlight to ensure a shadow. When an earthquake struck Chile, he lay the pole on its side and spray painted a rift in the earth. Mom died and he dressed the pole up as death and hung it from the crossbar photos of Mom as a baby. We'd stop by and find odd talismans from his youth arranged around the base, army medals, theater tickets, old sweatshirts, tubes of Mom's makeup. One autumn, he painted the pole bright yellow. He covered it with cotton swabs that winter for warmth and provided offspring by hammering in 6 cross sticks around the yard. He ran lengths of string between the pole and the sticks and taped to the string letters of apology, admissions of error, pleas for understanding, all written in a frantic hand on index cards. He painted a sign saying love and hung it from the pole, and another that said forgive. And then he died in the hall with a radio on, and we sold the house to a young couple who yanked out the pole and the sticks and left them by the road on garbage day. So what do you think of that?
I love that. Oh my God. I mean, if everybody could pull out some quirky thing from a family that you both love and cringe at the same time.
Yeah, it is something that I feel it's a story that goes through so many different movements, and but through this hyper specific kind of simultaneously something that starts off that you could imagine anyone doing and then kind of gradually descends or ascends from there. Does anyone else have any particular reactions to it?
I'm sorry I talk so much, but what was amazing is that in one large paragraph, he was able to do a long history from being a childhood to being married to death. Really quick.
It's such a, yeah, that line break you have between the first and the second paragraph where kind of everything is set up, and then, you know, you move another half lifetime. And you know, I think it is really, flash fiction does give so many opportunity. The constraints of flash fiction give so many opportunities for experimentation here. But, you know, you all, mostly all seem to, you know, write somewhat. So, you know, I'm not saying anything new here, but when we're talking about kind of meaning making in writing, this opportunity to kind of use fiction, to use these very particular lenses, these hyper-specific lenses, to create a sense of distance from yourself and the material, is to narrativize certain experiences that in real life, it's not, you know, how we encounter experiences. I think the meaning that we draw from experiences is oftentimes retrospective. And fiction is kind of one of those great opportunities to kind of create narratives and to create stories from very, very hyper-specific facets of a life, particular kind of experiences. There's another, you know, you could imagine this same story written in a way that just details kind of one opportunity to where the father was kind of dressing up the pole and maybe, you know, talking to the children at the same time, but instead you have this entire life through the pole, all in, you know, 600, 500 words. And you know, so if you like this, I would recommend checking out other flash fiction pieces. Girl, the piece by Jamaica Kincaid I sent, is another really great example that plays with you know, form as well as the brevity, which is, I think, you know, experimentation is kind of one of those constants in flash fiction. But, you know, I want us to, I just wanted us to kind of quickly look at those because I think there's a lot of overlap between fiction and nonfiction, which we'll be talking about in a second. And, you know, a lot of these distinctions and things I'm trying to draw out from individual portions, you know, poetry as an opportunity to kind of have a one-on-one relationship with language, you know, that is a quality that fiction and nonfiction can have as well. These are kind of overlapping features. And I think oftentimes the best works of these respective forms are do things that you would typically find in other forms, you know, nonfiction that plays with language, fiction that includes elements of analysis or the self, the writer's self, in the context of the narrative. It's so that is why I kind of want us to move on to nonfiction, because it I think the delineations between these genres are a lot murkier than I'm making them for the sake of this quick class. So I finally want us to look at nonfiction. As I mentioned, we're going to take a look at a Joan Didion piece. You know, the great thing about nonfiction is this opportunity to include memory and the sources of others within the work, the opportunity to use a flow of thought as a defining feature, something that you more rarely see in fiction. You know, I teach a class on creative writing and research, which is genre non-specific, but we oftentimes use nonfiction in for examples and readings and whatnot. And ultimately, I think some of the power of nonfiction, maybe the only power that nonfiction has, is an opportunity for your reader to kind of turn to a friend or tell a friend a story, and have them tell that friend this is something that actually happened. And so I want us to take a look at a selection from Joan Didion's On Keeping a Notebook. And it's a little bit longer, so I'm going to have us read it quietly to ourselves. And then when you're, I'm going to see if that actually works. Does everyone have the ability to pull up PDFs here? I know, Ingrid, you look like you might be on a phone. I'm not sure.
Oops.
Oh,
You have to unmute, Ingrid.
I'm fine. I think I already pulled up whatever you sent.
Okay, I'm
maybe-
gonna send one more then. But then I'll have us pull it up on our respective computers, and we'll read it quietly for the sake of.
I will have to leave. I will read this, but I have to go basically take pictures and film the 5th recital of 14. So thank you. I had so much fun.
Of course.
But I will definitely read this. I will definitely read it after I have time. So
And
thanks.
Ingrid, I'm
Thank you.
recording this session so I can share it with you, so you can catch the end of it as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and
Have fun,
Sandra had to
everybody.
leave for work, so
Yeah.
but I will share it with you.
That's why I'm like surrounded by mats, gymnastics mats. There's a lot of other stuff going on that it's hiding. So bye, guys.
Bye,
Bye.
Ingrid. We'll talk soon.
So what I'm going to have us do is read from the bottom of page 1, which starts with the paragraph, here is what it is. So starting with here is what it is and going on to the middle of page 3, which could have snowed, did snow, which I'm also going to put in the chat for reference. And I'm going to have us read that quietly. And if you all want to put the little reactions, if you go to more on your Zoom screen and just like raise your hands when you're done reading, I think that will be easiest. Or I can just check in if it seems like anyone doesn't find that. But let me just put up the starting cue and ending cue in the chat. I'm gonna give us another minute and then I'm going to have us all look at a couple selections from these first couple pages. Okay, so I want us to look at a couple selections from the first few pages because I think this is a wonderful craft essay from Joan Didion that talks about the process of keeping a notebook, I think, which is an important, not necessarily the practice itself is an important practice for a writer to have, but I think the intent behind keeping a notebook, which is that of noticing things and kind of creating stories for oneself, is a quality that you don't always encounter unless you're actively thinking about it in your own life, but which I think is really important, especially if one hopes to write one's own story. But I think also there are so many situations, scenes, images that we encounter in everyday life that are really striking if we think about them for an extra second, but the process of stopping and thinking for an extra second is oftentimes one that we don't necessarily think to do. Joan Didion is a wonderful writer of nonfiction, fiction, writing for the screen, and her nonfiction is very distinctive in this kind of careful distance she keeps from between herself as a writer and the material at hand, which does kind of create, I think, this sense that it is almost a novel you're reading, something that's created by a narrator. I'll read us a couple sections that I think gesture to how we might be able to use fiction or nonfiction situations for the opposite genre. Why did I write it down? In order to remember, of course, but what exactly was it I wanted to remember? How much of it actually happened? Did any of it? Why do I keep a notebook at all? It's easy to deceive oneself on all those scores. The impulse to write things down is a peculiarly compulsive one, inexplicable to those who do not share it, useful only accidentally, only secondarily, in the way that any compulsion tries to justify itself. So the point of keeping a notebook has never been, nor is it now, to have an accurate factual record of what I had been doing or thinking. That would be an entirely different impulse, an instinct for reality which I sometimes envy but do not possess. At no point have I ever been able to successfully keep a diary. My approach to daily life ranges from one grossly negligent to the merely absent. And on those few occasions when I have tried to dutifully record a day's events, boredom has so overcome me that the results are mysterious at best. What is this business about shopping, typing piece, dinner with E, depressed? Shopping for what? Typing what piece? Who is E? Was this E depressed or was I depressed? Who cares? And then finally, how it felt to me, that is getting closer to the truth about a notebook. And for our final exercise, which I'll give us another 10 minutes for, what I'd like each of us to do is think about a moment from the preceding week. Ideally, one with other people around you, but that is just, I think, the easiest form. What I'm going to have you do is recreate that scene in a short, maybe, paragraph length or so, from the perspective of either someone or something else in the room. And what I'd really like to emphasize here is thinking about how that change in perspective might cause that person to notice different things than you did. For instance, if you were cooking in the kitchen and, your dog was in the room with you, your dog's going to think about notice different things than you did in that moment. And so what I'd like you to do is think about a moment from the past week that you remember, either because it's important or it's just the first thing that comes to mind, and write it from the perspective of someone or something else in the room. That could even be something inanimate, in which case I'm curious to see what you come up with. So I'm going to give us 10 minutes to work on that. And then we'll join back together at 2:18 and share, and then wrap up. Just another minute or so. And let's just finish up the sentence or the line that you're on. The share pieces. Does anyone want to share the piece that they wrote?
I can share. And then Victoria, if you would like to, I'd love to hear yours. I'm writing from the perspective of an early morning when I'm lying in bed. I lie in bed in the early morning. This room still is dark with the shades tightly shut. The fan is spinning up above with a cool breeze. What did I say? Striking my face and my exposed arm lying across the comforter. My body is sprawled on the soft cotton sheets. I don't want to leave this safe, comforting space, but the morning calls and my mind goes into supercharge. It's almost as if I've been plunged into a cold bath, shocking my system into reality. No time to spare, work to be done. The day has begun. My moment of escapism has ended.
Yes.
Victoria, would you like to share yours or parts of it?
Well, to tell the truth, I didn't, my mind kept going back and forth because I couldn't write anything. I mostly write in Spanish because yeah, that's my first language, if you could tell. So usually in college too, I took English classes. It was a requirement. So as you could tell, they failed me. They failed. Well,
what were you, what were the scenes that first came to mind that you were thinking of from the past week?
Well, I think we had to do like an inanimate object. I think we had to be. I was trying to see what I would choose.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was trying to see if I could be like a table or something.
Right. It's did you feel like you struggled with that, or did you
Yeah, I struggled because I was like, how am I gonna put it in English? Like you know, the words wouldn't come out because my vocabulary. I need a lot of time to think, to translate. So like in Spanish.
Can you say a line or two in Spanish? Because Aiden, you speak a little Spanish and I understand a little Spanish as well. And I would love to hear even in Spanish.
Yeah, because I have a whole poem in Spanish too that I used to write poetry.
Okay.
So like I'm very familiar like with paintings and everything of Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera. Like I like reading poetry in Spanish. It's like music, like the songs they're poetry, and so when we were reading the poem, I could notice the at the ending, like in Spanish we call them estrofas. Like we read the syllables, and I could see the other lines how they end, like every other row. like
Right.
how they end. Yeah, so I love poetry. Like, and my favorite poem is about Pablo Neruda. Like, me gustas
Yep.
cuando callas porque estás como ausente y mi voz no te toca y estás como it's like talking. And then I analyze that poem. It's like a trauma to me. I analyzed that poem in college, and they gave me like a B or a C. I don't remember the class, and they're like, "You're not on point. You don't analyze the poem correctly." I'm like, "What? Isn't the poem to his lover, and
Right.
this and that?" And I'm like, "No, he's not talking about that." I'm like, "Oh man, okay." Oh, he's
That is,
writing to his lover.
yeah, that is unfortunate. That is, I think, the wrong way to look at that professor's ideas, the wrong way to look at poems. But I like that you tried for the inanimate object, because I think it's the challenging one, but I think what the great thing that kind of trying to get yourself to do that does is it forces you to think about what sensations might be like for something so different than yourself. I think we always, in creative writing, whenever I'm not sure what I'd like to write next in a scene, I kind of start listing the senses that like immediately come to mind, which is nice, but it can be repetitive over time. And I think when you're trying to figure out like what would a table feel about this particular moment, or even something similar like an animal or something, it kind of forces you to think about sensations or thoughts in a different way if you can get yourself to do it. And so it's kind of a nice exercise to just try and write from a perspective entirely unlike your own, because I think it opens up your vocabulary, it opens up kind of the sensations that you think about. Yeah, I mean, and I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I would feel comfortable moving between those genres, taking cues from poetry or taking cues from nonfiction when writing poetry, because I think that's really where some of the most interesting work comes about. When I talk to my kind of research students, we always think about what is the intent of the writer? What are they trying to do in this moment? Or what are you, the writer, trying to do in this moment? And where does your authority come from in a moment? Is it that you make the reader feel very close to you? Maybe, every thing you see, you list in really fine detail, and so that reader feels like they're right there with you. And that can be a form of authority. Having many facts available to you can be a form of authority. Using really detailed, interesting language can be a form of authority. And unlike that professor, I don't think there's a right way to do creative writing. It's really kind of thinking about what brings about an effect in the reader, thinking about what effect you want to create in the reader, and what sorts of language, what sorts of ways of telling a story, whether that's in giving them details from real life that they might be able to say, oh, that I know when that took place, so I can kind of put it and place it in my mind at a certain moment, or that seems like a world entirely unlike my own, and so I feel comfort in kind of trusting the writer because they know this world, I don't know this world. And creative writing has no rules to it. It is it is, not a genre, but a form that exists because writers have an idea that they'd like to bring about in the reader, and they're willing to use and can use whatever tools available to them, which is, the great thing about creative writing, whether it's poetry, nonfiction, or fiction. So I think that is, this is kind of a very brief intro to some of those tools, but I would, I think one of the great things about creative writing is that the best way to expand your idea of what those tools are is by reading and by interacting with lots of different types of writing and kind of trying to recreate what those writers are doing. So, I think if there's any takeaway from this very brief lesson, it's just to kind of think about what it is you're trying to do and don't put up any roadblocks based on thinking about what a piece of nonfiction or poetry should do. It's kind of whatever, in some ways, you want it to do. That's all I have for you all today.
Questions, Abe?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious, and Victoria, maybe this is wandering about in your mind as well. What I kind of, and I could be totally wrong, and maybe it's how I'm interpreting it, but like poetry, nonfiction, fiction, it almost seems like it could be extension of one another, where if you, the writer or the poet, since you've done this and you've published, do you find that you really, when you write, you're writing from kind of your narrative, your perspective, and it's really kind of personal? Or are you writing for the audience, the observer, the reader? I read an interesting article recently about, for example, visual arts, how, the visual art, the art in and of itself is the artist doing this. And many times it's very deep-seated and personal. And it really becomes a reality then when an observer comes up to it and engages with that piece of art, in terms of maybe they like it, maybe they hate it, but there was that engagement. I mean, when you write, whether it be fiction, nonfiction, poetry, is it personal, or is it to connect and engage, or I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to.
I think if you use a very wide definition of personal, then it, all writing, I think, all creative writing is personal in a very broad sense of being personal, in that it's not as though every piece is a reflection, is me consciously or subconsciously trying to say something about my own life. But the stories that I'm interested in, the facets of those stories I'm interested in, are not just a function of some sort of external factor, but partially what I'm interested in, which is personal, but not necessarily a personal narrative. Personal narratives are great, they're fine. Some people exclusively work with personal narratives. Other people are much more interested in telling other people's stories, and that's why they write. Other people, it's somewhere in between, where they want to explore things from their own life, but don't want it to be so explicit. So it really just depends. What I always think about with long projects, at least, is or especially nonfiction projects, I guess I would say, is there some sort of external thing that I need to be doing? Is, for instance, in my new book, I know that there's something I need to be doing that exists outside of my own interests, which is this story hasn't been told before, And so part of what interests me about it, but also part of the reason why other people might be interested in it, is that they're experiencing this story for the first time, which means that I can't assume people have heard this story, which means I treat it slightly differently. So there is that external element, and then the kind of personal element is the things that when I'm telling this story, I kind of focus on maybe a little bit more than a different person who is telling the story. So, if you broadly define personal, there's always some personal element, because a writer no one's forcing a writer to write something. They're always, for the most part, choosing to write something. And in choosing to do something, there is a personal decision at play. But in terms of a personal story, I think that's really just dependent on the writer and the project they're taking on.
Got it. And then one other question. I'm a visual learner. And so, for example, I find that creative nonfiction, like you have done in Sprinting Through No Man's Land, and some of the other articles you've written, really helped me visually encapsulate the scene. And I've heard this saying that you paint with words. And in creative nonfiction, would you describe that more? It's almost like because even like the poem, the first poem you shared, to me, I could visualize it, but I have to really like dissect the words to put it all together. But the little words and descriptors help me visualize it. And so I'm much better at when people, in quotes, paint with words, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that more so in creative nonfiction, or?
It really depends. I mean, I think what you're essentially describing is this idea of writing works around scenes, which means, in my definition, that the writer is using time in a more or less realistic sense. They're not trying to condense time, and they're not trying to expand time. They're kind of, maybe that's because someone's having a conversation, and so, time exists more or less realistically in conversation. But I think also there's a certain sense of using visual cues and or other sensory clues that kind of allow someone to feel as though the thing that's being described to them exists kind of in a three-dimensional space, and is playing along at more or less the speed of life. It depends, because creative nonfiction, for instance, includes criticism in it, literary criticism, which is, exists at the intersection of theory and other art, but generally isn't visual in the same way. I think there is generally, in literary fiction and nonfiction, a desire to, or a practice of writing in scene, as I described. And so, I think as a general rule, there's more fiction that's visually written than nonfiction, just because nonfiction includes criticism, includes essays, traditional essays and things like that are not necessarily visual. And, poetry is visual, but is more abstractly visual. So it really just depends.
Okay, great. Victoria, did you have any questions for Adin?
Well, no, I think he answered most of my my questions through you. Yeah, like the first question, I think, yeah, it was that one, through the lens of a writer. I recently purchased a book about how to write a book. A
Okay.
book on how to write a book. It's so strange. And it says something about like the author of the book. It mentions about writing it from that he originally wrote a book from to this person, and then every reader takes it to I guess from a different lens.
Yeah.
So I guess we do it to a certain muse or to a certain person, and then like, but we have to have a focus in mind when we're writing something. That's what I took from the book. I guess we have to have a focus, and then the person just grabs onto the book however they want to look at it, because it's a book from him, from that author. I thought it was dedicated to someone else, and it turns out it was to an ex-girlfriend or something like that. And yeah, I had no clue, and I'm here thinking, oh yeah, it's about depression and about young like teenagers, and I'm like, oh my god, like I kind of made it my own, like at the time
Right.
when I was reading about it. And it's like, oh, I guess he wrote it at a time when he was in love and with this girl. And yeah.
Yeah, no, I think which is maybe similar to what you're saying, is I think like in terms of having a focus when one is writing, to either kind of write the book that you as a reader would want to read, or writing towards kind of your ideal sense of a reader if you don't feel comfortable kind of writing it for yourself. I mean, I guess writing is personal in that way, and that I think the most successful books are the books that, you know, a writer fully dives into. And I think one way to kind of fully dive into something from the level of being interested in the subject is to kind of write the version of the book that you would want to read, rather than kind of some other person who you think you might have a similar, you know, because yeah, everyone will take something different from it, but I think that you know, you want to have that kind of passion for the project, especially just because writing a book takes a long time, and so you want to stay interested in it. And I think, you know, kind of saying to yourself, what would you want to read if you were reading this story, is a really great way to think about how to stay interested in a subject for a long period of time, but also to create a work that's meaningful to you, which won't be the same meaning that everyone gets from it, but that's kind of part of the beauty of writing and of publishing, is that people will pick up on different details. They'll be interested in different details. They'll, you know, some detail will remind them of something that happened in their life, and, you know, that is something that means something to them that you can't hope to kind of plan ahead. So yeah, but I do think it doesn't have to be a super specific focus, but I think, you know, having some sort of guiding light, whether that's yourself or not, is important.
Victoria, I'd love if you would email me the poem you were talking about in Spanish. It will challenge me as I'm studying Spanish.
Oh, okay. The one that I read?
Yeah. I would love to read it in Spanish. And
Okay.
Aid, is there a different link, Aid, that you might want to share with Victoria so she wants some more information? Victoria, do you go to LinkedIn at all? Or I think you have
yes, I have a LinkedIn account.
I mean, sorry, what do you, what, about
well,
what?
You know, if people want to read more about you and your works.
Oh, the website is the thing.
When I just put in the chat.
Yeah.
Do you see that, Victoria? I put his website in the chat there.
Okay, thank you. I opened it before I forgot.
Yeah, and you're also on LinkedIn if you can search him.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, for the sake of time for Aiden and Victoria, I don't want to take up your Saturdays, but this has really been great, Aiden. I really appreciate it. Sorry, a few people had to drop out because of work, but I did record it and we'll edit it. So if you don't mind, I'd like to share it with some folks that couldn't attend today that wanted to.
Yeah.
Is that okay? I'll share the edited version with you first to make sure it's okay. And then I'll probably post it on the website if you don't mind.
Okay.
Okay. Cool.
Thank you. I just had one question.
Yeah.
Well, if it's not too personal, who would be your inspiration for writing, or your target audience?
It's not too personal. It is a difficult question. I mean, I think that, you know, in terms of each book, I do kind of use myself in terms, not in that I'm writing to myself, but in that the interests I have are kind of things that I think I would be interested in, and hope that someone else might be interested in. But in terms of inspirations, I'm a big fan of James Salter and W.G. Sebald in terms of fiction. And as far as poetry goes, Anne Carson and Lucy Brock Broido. I'll just type the names into here. I think those are kind of the people whose I think at least style-wise, I'm really interested in. And that's not necessarily to say that I try to recreate them in the writing, but the people whose writing I turn back to, and I think oftentimes when I think of inspirations, it's people whose writing I don't know how they do what they do. It's kind of some sort of I don't get it. It's like something I don't feel like I myself can do, and that's always fun, because when you totally understand what a writer's doing, I think you lose some of the appeal. So it's nice to kind of be searching for something that you don't feel like you totally get.
Yeah. Wow.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Aiden, and thanks for sticking through this, Victoria. And I'd love to see your poem. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. So thanks so much, you guys.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll see you guys. Have a great Saturday.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.